Our topic for this week is sentence parsing. First off, what is sentence parsing? Sentence parsing is when you break down a sentence into its individual parts, which helps us understand the meaning. So, do you think we wait for all the information is finished to start to understand the meaning of a sentence? No, obviously not. That would take far too long. Our brain doesn't do things that way, so we just try and work it out as we go along. We try to interpret what is going to come from what has already came in the sentence. This can lead to errors in understanding, as we jump to conclusions about what we think the sentence is trying to say before understanding the whole thing. A great example of these errors are so-called garden sentences. Examples of these garden path sentences are such as, Mary had a little lamb, but I was quite hungry, so I had the lamb and a bowl of soup. Or time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies in contrast, like a banana. This changes what the first part of the sentence means by the information in the second part, and that is why these catch us off guard.
What leads you down a garden path? There are many factors that play a role in interpreting these sentences. Firstly, people tend to search for the simplest phrase structure that will accommodate the words heard so far. This strategy can produce problems for more complex sentences. For example, in the sentence, the secretary applauded for his efforts was soon promoted. When you read the secretary applauded, you interpret this initially as a noun phrase and a verb, rather than the correct interpretation of a noun phrase and a separate clause modifying secretary. Furthermore, people tend to assume that the sentence they are reading or hearing is an active voice sentence rather than a passive voice sentence. This means that often they interpret the initial noun phrase as the doer of the action and not the recipient. Your tendency is to see the secretary sentence as an active voice sentence, when in reality it is a passive voice sentence. The secretary was applauded by someone else. Here our inclination to assume active voice works against the correct interpretation of the sentence. In general, people try to parse a sentence in a way that makes sense to them. This means that the background knowledge of a person guides them with parsing. In the secretary sentence, your background knowledge tells you that the majority of secretaries are female, which adds to the confusion of figuring out who was applauding and who was applauded. The last important factor that you use when parsing a sentence is the context that the sentence is in. If in the secretary example you had the conversational context of the sentence, such as the question, who was promoted, before the secretary sentence, it would be far easier to understand. Just as important is the physical and social context you encounter the sentence in. This is known as the extra-linguistic context. An example of this is the sentence, put the apple on the towel into the box. At first glance, this sentence is confusing, but if you're provided with this image, the sentence immediately becomes clear.